For many years, Joanne Woodward remained silent as everyone gushed about her marriage to Paul Newman, the Hollywood hottie that all women desired and whom she miraculously saved. Their story of love was presented as perfect, almost sacred. Joanne is 95 years old and no longer holds back. At last, she is revealing the truth about her life with Newman, and what she says upends the fairy story that everyone believed to be true. Hollywood Heights to Georgia origins. Before she was known as Paul Newman's wife, Joanne Woodward was just a girl from the South who wanted to live in a large metropolis. She was born on February 27, 1930, in Thomasville, Georgia, as Joanne Gagnilia Trimier Woodward, and her name was significant from birth. These middle names, which had their roots in ancient Huguenot ancestry, suggested that the girl would be unique. Her path was not solely determined by her heritage, though. It was sparked by her mother's passion for movies. Instilling aspiration in her daughter's name, Eleanor Woodward named her after Hollywood queen Joan Crawford since she liked movies so much. Growing up, Joanne had one brother, Wade Jr., and a restless personality that never stayed in one place for too long. She spent her early years in Thomasville, Blakely, and Thomaston until the Woodwards eventually settled in Marietta, Georgia. Joanne was a student at Marietta High School. She will never truly leave the place where she first discovered her stage. Nor did she forget her origins. She supported the city's Strand Theater and Marietta High School, demonstrating her devotion to her hometown even after celebrity found her. But it wasn't in a classroom that she fell in love with Hollywood. It all started one electrifying night in Atlanta. Joanne, who was 9 at the time, was caught up in the flashing lights and the star-studded arrivals at the Gone with the Wind premiere. Without hesitation, she jumped into the line of actors and landed on Laurence Olivier's lap directly. He was the partner of the film's iconic lead actress, Vivien Leigh, at the time. Most children would have been dragged away by security, but Joanne made a lasting impression. When she collaborated with Olivier on a 1977 television adaptation of Comeback Little Sheba, decades later, she brought that memory back to him. He glanced at her and was sure he recognized the daring young girl who had snatched a seat on his lap. With her parents' divorce causing yet another move, Joanne's adolescent years took a dramatic turn. This time to South Carolina's Greenville. She received more than a diploma from Greenville High School. She demonstrated that she was a performer and not just a dreamer at the little theater, and she departed with experience. She joined the Chi Omega sorority and majored in acting at Louisiana State University because of her enthusiasm. Honing her skills before aiming for New York City, the only venue large enough to realize her dreams. Joanne wasted no time once she arrived. By practicing under Sanford Meisner at the local playhouse and attending the Actors Studio, she established herself in the very place where talent was created. She was learning more than simply lines. She was developing into an actress who would eventually make her mark in Hollywood. She was not yet the wife of Paul Newman. The Oscar wasn't given to her. Perhaps the flawless half of the most popular duo in America. She was just Joanne, that Southern girl who once fought for her goals, refused to be normal, and crashed a movie premiere. But she was never going to be ordinary. She had been transported from Greenville to LSU to the streets of New York by a restless fire that was only starting to burn. Once an outsider, the girl was now entering their world with the intention of carving out a place for herself. Taking up both the stage and the screen. Joanne Woodward had changed from the young child who would frequently interrupt film premieres by the early 1950s. She was squeezing her way into the genuine business. She made her first appearance on television in the penny episode of Robert Montgomery Presents in 1952. It wasn't spectacular or noteworthy, but it was a beginning. She was soon working hard to get on stage. Until she was hired as an understudy for the William Inga Drama Picnic in 1953 and 1954, she kept trying out. This is when fate intervened. She ran into Paul Newman backstage. Jacqueline Witt, his first wife, was still his wife at the time. But there was no denying his bond with Joanne. That's where the guy who would become her great love entered her life, behind the curtain of a Broadway production. Joanne's testing ground was television. She appeared on the Ford Television Theater, the Philco Goodyear Television Playhouse, Omnibus, Danger, Goodyear Playhouse, and Tales of Tomorrow, among other shows. She wasn't yet a star, but she was on the right track, making frequent appearances until Hollywood couldn't ignore her. She played a fierce orphan in the post-Civil War Western Count 3 and Prey, which had her big screen debut in 1955. Fox signed her to a long-term contract after the role made her famous. She was playing a wealthy heiress opposite Robert Wagner in the thriller A Kiss Before Dying by 1956, which gave a sneak peek at how captivating she might be on screen. Joanne even sneaked back to Broadway with The Lovers, and even though the performance didn't survive long, her passion for the theater and movie never went away. Everything changed, however, in 1957. Joanne Woodward's performance in The Three Faces of Eve left the world in awe. She portrayed three distinct characters in one film: a housewife, a seductive rebel, and a balanced young lady. Her performance was so nuanced and multifaceted that critics found it hard to believe they were seeing the same actor. Not even the Academy could. Wearing a frock that she had sewn herself, Joanne took home the Oscar for Best Actress. No fancy dress. No Hollywood flair, just Joanne, her unadulterated skill, and a needle and thread. She became famous for being the underdog in that particular situation. She went on to become Fox's leading woman. Her fame was solidified by movies like The Sound and the Fury starring Yul Brynner and No Down Payment. She was cast in The Fugitive Kind by Sidney Lumet starring Anna Magnani and Marlon Brando. Joanne's work with Paul Newman was taking center stage, even if the movie didn't do very well at the box office. She subsequently said that she adored the film From the Terrace, which she co-starred in, primarily because she felt she looked like Lana Turner and Paris Blues, demonstrating that their on-screen and off-screen relationship was just as strong. Working closely with Gypsy Rose Lee to hone her skills, Joanne bravely ventured into burlesque for The Stripper in 1963. She was enthralling audiences in A Big Hand for the Little Lady and competing with industry titans like Sean Connery in A Fine Madness by the middle of the 1960s. But she gave one of her most passionate performances in Newman's production and direction of Rachel, portraying a lonely schoolteacher on a quest for affection. She was nominated for another Oscar for the role, establishing her as more than just Mrs. Newman. Joanne's career transcended all media by the late 1970s. In the end, she co-starred with Burt Reynolds in See How She Runs, which won an Emmy, and in Come Back, Little Sheba, she reunited with Laurence Olivier, reminding him again of the night she had jumped into his lap as a youngster. She demonstrated her versatility as a director in 1979 when she helmed an episode of Family. She was also capable of running the show. She had a hectic 1980s. She had appearances in Crisis at Central High, The Shadow Box, and Candida. She also made a comeback to Broadway in 1981 and 1982 and co-starred with Newman once more in Harry and Son. She was featured on television in Do You Remember Love, 1985, for which she received another Emmy. She was also a writer and director when she wasn't performing, having adapted Shirley Jackson's Come Along With Me in 1982 and portrayed Tennessee Williams in The Glass Menagerie. Beyond only accumulating roles, Joanne was also garnering fame as a producer of Broadway's Dreamers, the group theater's legacy, as well as numerous Emmys and an Oscar. She succeeded in proving herself decade after decade. That her spouse, her marriage, or even the Hollywood apparatus did not define her. She forged her own identity. Joanne Woodward established her career in theater, film, and television by making bold decisions, giving unvarnished performances, and being genuine in a sea of Hollywood glitz. She had no desire to be glamorous. She was trying to find a job. And she created a lasting impression in the process. However, the work was never the only aspect of Joanne's story. It also had to do with the man who had been by her side for 50 years. Through the victories and the losses. Because in addition to creating her own legacy, she was a part of one of the most amazing love stories in Hollywood history. A collaboration that became a romance. The romance between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward was more than just a Hollywood romance. For a long-lasting marriage in show business, it became the gold standard. Their marriage lasted for 50 years, from 1958 until Newman's passing in 2008. And they created a life that blended legacy, tragedy, family, and passion over those decades. Silently, the bond began. They originally became acquainted while Newman was still married to Jackie Witt for the Broadway production of Picnic. Joanne wasn't enamored right away. She later compared him to an ice cream soda on a hot day, but she wasn't first impressed by his appearance, she said years later. Something so ideal that it was hard to resist. Friendship did not become something that could be denied until they met again on the set of The Long Hot Summer in 1957. Newman's previous marriage dissolved shortly after, and he and Joanne started a new life together. Joanne immediately became the stepmother to Newman's 3 children from his first marriage, Scott, Susan, and Stephanie, after they were married in Las Vegas on January 29, 1958. 3 more daughters were added to the family by her and Newman: Melissa, Claire Klee, and Eleanor Nell. In Westport, Connecticut, far from the bustle of Hollywood, their family's existence took shape. In April 1959, the same year that Newman secured a major role in The Young Philadelphians, their first child, Nell, was born. Later, Nell would try her hand at acting under the stage name Nell Potts before establishing Newman's own organics in 1993. Melissa was born in 1961, the same day their movie Paris Blues debuted in the United States. For a family that was surrounded by movies, it was a fitting turn of events. Melissa briefly entered the acting profession like her parents did. In 1965, the youngest, Claire Klee, was born. She had a strong love for horses as a child and went on to become a nationally ranked equestrian before focusing on her father's causes. They became closer professionally as their family expanded. They really made their imprint at Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1963 by pushing their hands and feet into the cement and signed their names next to their prints. Joanne was one of the first people to be honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1958, therefore she had already made history before Newman received his star in 1994. Their marriage was based on comedy rather than merely beauty or fame. Joanne once clarified that, even if Newman was unquestionably a track, what really counted was his capacity to make her giggle. And they were kept going by that. In response to a question concerning faithfulness, Newman himself stated bluntly that he had steak at home. Thus, there was no justification for going out for a hamburger. They frequently had overlapping careers. Rachel was one of their best partnerships in 1968. Joanne gazed as Newman gave the direction. The husband and wife were nominated for Academy Awards that year, which is one of the few occasions that a couple has received such recognition jointly. In the film, their daughter Nell even played a younger version of her mother's role. Featuring Nell once more, Joanne's portrayal in Newman's 1972 film Effective Gamma Rays on Man and the Moon Marigolds earned her a Cannes Best Actress Award nomination and a Golden Globe nod. However, tragedy was also a part of their story. In 1978, Scott, Newman's oldest son, passed away at the age of 28 due to an unintentional drug and alcohol overdose. Newman later acknowledged that he had repeatedly knelt down to plead with his son for forgiveness, claiming that he had convinced himself that Scott's actions were simply the result of reckless immaturity. The Scott Newman Center, which focuses on drug abuse education, was founded by Newman in Scott's honor. The family was devastated by the loss, but Newman and Joanne became even more involved in charitable giving. In Ashford, Connecticut, they established the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in 1988 as a free sanctuary for kids with life-threatening illnesses to find happiness and camaraderie. It turned became one of Newman's biggest passions, and celebrities banded together to support it. Acting had not absolved Newman of his civic responsibility, he once clarified. It was still his duty to return the favor. They continued to be together even while their filmmaking lagged. Their last on-screen partnership was in the HBO drama Empire Falls in 2005. Both received Golden Globe, SAG, and Emmy nominations, and Newman won all of the categories. It was a fitting farewell for a pair who had been enhancing each other's work for decades. Their love remained steadfast behind closed doors. They discreetly commemorated their 50th wedding anniversary in 2008, which is a significant milestone that few Hollywood couples ever achieve. Despite the fact that beauty is fleeting, Joanne previously thought that the best present she could receive was a companion who could make her laugh every day. In that same year, Paul Newman's fight against lung cancer ended. He passed away on September 26, 2008, in the company of his loved ones at his Westport farmhouse. He was 83 years old. For half a century, Newman and Woodward bucked the odds in Hollywood. Humor, commitment, and an unwavering collaboration were the foundations of their marriage. They worked together, were benefactors, and were lovers. More than anything else, they demonstrated that a true love story could survive in a world based on delusion. Joanne Woodward suffered from numerous tragedies. It was Joanne Woodward's 95th birthday in February. She was one of the last big stars of the golden age of Hollywood, and she celebrated her birthday at a quiet place in Connecticut, distant from the spotlight. The lady who seemed to have it all, Paul Newman's wife, an Oscar winner, and the industry darling once was. For more than 10 years, Joanne has been out of the public eye. In 1993, she played her final movie appearance in Philadelphia. Her final public appearance was in 2013, and her final TV appearance was in 2005, when she co-starred with Paul in Empire Falls. There has been stillness ever since. When Paul passed away in 2008, Joanne took a total back seat. The couple sold their opulent Manhattan penthouse, which was the site of numerous parties with guests who were celebrities, for around $10 million in December 2024. There is no longer any glitz. Joanne and Paul purchased the family's historic 19th-century property in Westport, Connecticut, to escape the insanity of California and raise their daughters there. There, they established a real life. In addition, Paul passed away there, and Joanne currently spends her last chapter there. However, the weight of a dreadful truth lies beneath this calm hideaway. Joanne was 77 years old when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2007, a few days before Paul received the news that his cancer was terminal. Overnight, she withdrew from public life. The Hollywood celebrity who everyone believed had it everything gradually disappeared from view. Her daughters became her pillars, and Westport became her haven. Ethan Hawke was working on a 6-part documentary series about Joanne and Paul at the time of The Last Movie Stars. He explained the family's urgent request. The idea was to release it while Joanne was still living and could still see it, even after she had been suffering from Alzheimer's for 15 years. There was more to the documentary than the mythology of Paul and Joanne. The goal was to return something to her before time robbed her of everything. The narrative of Joanne Woodward appears to be a dream from the outside. Beauty, fame, accolades, and the affection of one of the most sought-after men in Hollywood. Her life has been characterized by heartache, grief, and struggles that most admirers were unaware of, despite the glitter. The illusion then breaks down. Joanne Woodward, 95, finally speaks up about Paul Newman. For many years, Joanne Woodward remained silent. As the world gathered around the altar of her marriage to Hollywood's blue-eyed deity, Paul Newman, she sat silently, smiling, courteous, and unflappable. They dubbed theirs the century's greatest love story. A golden couple impervious to scandal, heartache, or disintegration. Joanne, meanwhile, is 95 years old now and no longer entertains the fairy tale. An account of a marriage that was far more chaotic than the legend permitted has started to emerge from those closest to her as well as from Paul himself through his post-mortem biography. It is also a story that demonstrates that even Hollywood royalty was unable to avoid the pain of regret, sadness, temptation, and betrayal. In 1953, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman were both understudy for the Broadway production of Picnic When Their Eyes Met. Joanne immediately drew Paul's attention, even though he was previously married and had 3 kids. The bond was so powerful that it sparked an affair that ended his first marriage and laid the groundwork for a union years later that was praised as one of Hollywood's longest-lasting. Newman divorced Jackie Witt, his first wife, in 1958. In Las Vegas, they got married to Joanne. They would go on to have 3 kids, make 16 films together, spend 50 years together, and weather storms that the general public hardly ever saw. They appeared to the outer world to be flawlessly balanced, loyal, passionate, and impenetrable. However, the reality inside the family household was never so straightforward. Melissa, their daughter, once called the marriage complicated, pointing out that people held onto a fantasy of her parents that was just untrue. There was more to home life than sweetness and sunshine. Arguments simmered and flared, there were extended periods of stress, and the marriage itself was on the verge of disintegrating. Melissa acknowledged that the thing that kept them together was their will to keep going, even during their lowest points. The issues went beyond personality conflicts or pressures from one's job. Paul Newman has a lot of baggage despite his charm and charisma. The passing of Scott, his only son, plagued him. She passed away in 1978 at the age of 28 due to a drug and alcohol overdose. Guilt was a silent, destructive force in his life, and that loss never left him. And then there was the alcohol. Family members remembered Paul's love of whiskey and beer, which frequently descended into full-blown binges. A hard line was once drawn in the sand by Joanne, who was the one who suffered the most from drunken absences and late nights. She made it plain that a husband who stumbled home from what appeared to be work would not be tolerated. Too inebriated to work. Either she would leave or he would gather himself. Paul knew she wasn't playing a bribe. The demands of Hollywood simply made matters more difficult. In their own right, Newman and Woodward were both celebrities who had to continuously strike a balance between their personal lives and the demands of celebrity. Joanne, on the other hand, frequently took a backseat to focus on their kids and security, while Paul struggled to balance his roles as a beloved symbol and a family man. Paul was brutally honest in his biography, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Guy, about how women were vying for the attention of Hollywood's most sought-after guy. He didn't defend his reputation or hide his shortcomings in it. He acknowledged that Joanne had roused a side of himself that even he was surprised by. Joanne had constructed a temporary love nest in their Beverly Hills home, and he characterized the first few years of their marriage as being filled with passion. They frequently engaged in wild intimacy in a room she called the F-Hut, which was equipped with a double bed from a junk store, even though his children were just down the hall. Paul recounted in one of the most frank admissions ever made by a Hollywood star, "We left a trail of lust all over the place." But that lust wasn't limited to Joanne alone. Let's introduce Nancy Bacon, a former cocktail waitress who is now a Hollywood socialite affectionately known as Bacon in Legs. At the height of Newman's success, he was drawn to her because she was little, attractive, and incredibly charming. Bacon herself said that their purported affair, which lasted for almost 2 years, was barely a secret at all. The whole Hollywood world knew. Directors, friends, and insiders. They took his place. Bacon claims that although Paul was lying to Joanne about his late work hours, he was sneaking into her house and sleeping in her bed night after night. It was euphoric for her. For him, it was a concoction of alcohol, desire, and guilt. During this time, Newman was already struggling with his drinking issue and frequently submerged his conscience in whiskey and beer. She always knew, Bacon later said, that the romance would end not because their passion died, but because his guilt would eventually catch up with him. The whispers about the infidelity made their way back to Joanne, even though Newman scolded reporters who dared to question him. The treachery stung her deeply. Tired of the drinking, the late nights, and now the cheating, she reportedly thought about leaving completely at one time. But in spite of all, she stayed. The choice to remain shaped Joanne Woodward's life. It wasn't easy being Mrs. Paul Newman, she subsequently acknowledged. It was accompanied, at times equally, by ongoing struggles, both private and public, good and bad. She acknowledged, however, that the positives exceeded the negatives. The same was true for their girls. Their parents' marriage lasted despite being tumultuous, convoluted, and occasionally explosive. They didn't just leave. They fought fiercely. For his part, Paul consistently declared his love for Joanne. Even when ladies flocked to him and his status as a **** symbol meant that he would always be tempted, he reminded everyone that he already had what he desired at home. But behind closed doors, Joanne carried the scars of being that stake, of being the anchor for a guy who occasionally drowned and occasionally drifted, as his well-known line encapsulated. Even in his final years, Paul appeared to be enthralled by Joanne. His face lit up the instant she entered a room, according to friends, and her presence had the ability to completely change his mood. Although they had arguments, they also had a deep affection for one another that neither could find anywhere else. Joanne adjusted to the job of symbol's wife, despite not being praised as a symbol like her husband. She insisted she didn't feel threatened and frequently dismissed the flurry of attention Paul got. Those closest to her, however, were aware of the fractures. Behind her castle of poise and dignity was the fatigue of someone who had been through far more than the world had ever known. Joanne no longer needs to perform the role. She is 95 years old and lives peacefully in Westport, Connecticut. Her and Paul's former celebrity playground, a penthouse in Manhattan, has been sold. It has been over 10 years since her last public appearance. She was once a force in Hollywood, but Alzheimer's has caused her keen wit and brilliance to fade. However, Paul's memoir, Joanne's Family, and documentaries like Ethan Hawke's The Last Movie Stars are all helping to uncover her truth. The fable is done. Supplanted by something more strong, more painful, and more human. According to her daughters, even when she was on the verge of losing it, her mother was always the rock. A wife who resisted giving in to her husband's troubles, set limits, and demanded respect. She remained because she was prepared to battle for her marriage, even when it almost broke her, rather than because it was perfect. Paul acknowledged his shortcomings, betrayals, and imperfections in his own words. However, he also acknowledged his admiration for Joanne, the lady who not only married him but, in his words, gave birth to a creature. Although the fantasy of their ideal marriage has been demolished, something rarer and more authentic, a tale of perseverance, anguish, survival, and yes, love, has taken its place. By the time Joanne becomes 95, her legacy is not exclusively linked to Paul's. The woman who accompanied Hollywood's golden boy is not all that she is. She has survived the harsh paradoxes of love, a husband's intoxication, an affair, the heartbreaking death of a stepson, and the weariness of handling a challenging marriage. The sad thing about Joanne Woodward's life is that, while Paul was alive, the world never saw a complete picture of her. She was a myth's silent half, the one who took the hits so the fairy tale could shine. However, as the truth comes to light, her silence is more powerful than any screenplay could ever be. Joanne Woodward is 95 years old and no longer the ideal wife in a golden marriage. She is something far greater. The woman who went through everything and eventually allowed the truth to seep through the gaps. Regarding Woodward and Newman's connection, what do you think? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Additionally, click the following video that appears on your screen. It will be enjoyable to you.